Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today's episode continues the emotional journey of Hoài Ca, Hùng, and little Tony. Just when they thought things couldn't get worse. Tony was hospitalized, and Hoài Ca was robbed right in front of the hospital while trying to buy food for her son. Everything felt like it was falling apart. But even in the darkest moment, there was a spark of hope. A sudden call from the police changed everything. This morning, Hùng was called to the police station to assist with the investigation. They say they've found key evidence, and that the suspect may finally have been identified. How will Hoài Ca react when she hears the full story? Can they recover the money they devoted years to saving for Tony? Stay tuned till the end to see what the investigation reveals, and whether a new light is finally returning to this little family. The next morning, the first sunlight slipped through the thin curtain, casting pale streaks across the worn tile floor of the hospital's dormitory room. The sound of carts rolling and the loudspeaker announcing therapy schedules echoed down the hallway. Hùng buttoned his shirt, eyes drifting toward the bed where Tony sat while Hoài Ca fed him porridge. Her face was exhausted, still pale after an entirely sleepless night. Just as he tucked the medical file into his pocket, his phone vibrated. A firm, official voice came through, each word hitting his ear with precision. "Is this Mr. Hùng? This is the Central Ward Police. Early this morning, we arrested a drug addict who may be involved in yesterday's robbery of your wife's bag. Can you come to identify him?" Hùng froze for a few seconds. His heart pounded, tension and hope crashing into him at the same time. He turned to Hoài Ca, voice low but steady. "There's news. They need me at the station to confirm the suspect. Stay here with Tony, I'll be back soon." Hoài Ca nodded gently. Her eyes were swollen from fatigue, yet they shimmered with a fragile spark, the hope they'd been clinging to since last night. She only managed to whisper, "Be careful. Call me right away if anything happens." Hùng nodded, grabbed his worn-out shirt, and stepped out. The hospital corridor was bright and polished, slippers slapped against the shiny floor as the loudspeaker announced patient names. He wove through the crowd, every step feeling heavier than the last. Outside in the parking lot, the early breeze carried the chilly dampness left over from last night's rain. He put on his helmet and started the motorbike. The engine roared confidently, but his heart refused to calm down. The image of Hoài Ca sitting on the hospital bed, thin hands gripping her phone tightly, wouldn't leave his mind. Morning traffic filled the road into town. Hùng sped past familiar turns, the wind hitting his face, yet he still felt burning hot. He didn't even remember how many streets he had crossed. All he knew was that, when he finally stopped, a metal sign stood in front of him. Ben Son District Police Station. He walked in, showed his documents, nodding in greeting. The air smelled strongly of coffee and cigarette smoke. Keyboard tapping mixed with the steady voices of officers going through routine tasks. A young officer with a firm build approached him. "Mr. Hùng, right? Please follow me to the identification room. The suspect was arrested at 3 a.m. and is being held for questioning." Hùng clenched his hand and nodded. His footsteps echoed through the long hallway, each one pounding like his heartbeat. The door to the identification room opened. Dim light filtered through narrow steel bars, illuminating a thin young man slumped against the wall, messy hair, vacant eyes, wrists bound with plastic ties. Hùng stood still. In a split second, everything rushed back. The scream, the bag ripping from Hoài Ca's hands, the motorcycle speeding away. His eyes locked onto the man's face. Just 1 second. Enough to know. His voice dropped, steady and cold. "It's him." The officer took notes, then looked up. "We recovered a small ethnic patterned pouch and some cash. It may belong to your wife. The evidence is being sealed and will be verified shortly." Hung nodded slowly. His gaze drifted toward the window, where sunlight spilled through the bars in broken fragments. He took a long breath, shoulders trembling, unsure if it was relief or the anger still burning inside him. At the district police station, that morning felt strangely quiet. Sunlight slipped through an old dusty curtain, casting thin golden stripes across the gray tile floor. Inside the duty room, the steady hum of a ceiling fan blended with the rustle of paperwork and the soft tapping of a keyboard. The air was thick with the scent of bitter coffee and cigarette smoke, mixed with the damp smell of a building that hadn't been repainted in years, that distinct smell of places where justice and exhaustion coexist. Hung walked down the hallway, each step heavy as though he were stamping on his own anxiety. Outside, the ward's loudspeaker broadcast the morning news, echoing in the distance, merging with the noise of motorbikes on the street. He followed the young officer, the soles of his shoes tapping against the old tile, sharp, dry echoes. They stopped in front of a faded green door, a small metal plate on it reading, "Interrogation room number 2. The officer knocked twice, then pushed it open. Dim light spilled out into the hallway like a thin mist. The room was bare, a wooden desk with documents stacked on one side, a chipped porcelain kettle, and, in the corner, a steel chair where a young man sat with his head bowed. He was painfully thin, his collar hanging loose around his neck, shoulders jutting out like bones. His hair was greasy and stuck to his forehead, his eyes sunken and ringed with dark circles. Pale gray skin. Cracked lips. Plastic restraints dug into his wrists, leaving raw scratch marks. He looked like an empty shell, someone life had beaten until there was nothing left to break. The investigator standing beside Hung spoke, his voice hoarse from cigarettes. "Mr. Hung, this is Nguyen Van Kai, a long-time drug user. He confessed he snatched your wife's bag near the provincial hospital gate. We arrested him at dawn while he was hiding in an old rental block near the bus station." Another officer placed a small fabric pouch on the desk, worn edges, dusty, familiar. "This is the recovered evidence. Please check and confirm if it belongs to your wife." Hung stepped forward, his eyes locking onto the bag. He froze. It was the same pouch. The tiny scratch on the strap, the loose thread where Lythieuca once patched it up, the faded woven pattern from years of use. There was no mistake. His hand trembled as he picked it up, fingers brushing the leather strap. The zipper caught for a moment before opening. Inside, every item appeared, painfully familiar. Neatly folded bills in a small envelope. Hospital documents with Tony's name written across the top. Receipts, prescriptions still smelling of fresh ink. And on the very top, a soft fabric cloth Lythieuca used to wrap Tony's food. The cloth was still there, pale blue, frayed along the edges, carrying a faint scent of cheap laundry soap. A scent so familiar he could almost see the tiny rental room, the gas stove, Lythieuca wiping sweat from her forehead while calling Tony to eat. The officer spoke again, voice lower now, as if intentionally gentle. "We recovered everything. All the money and documents are intact and sealed. You can rest assured." Hung didn't answer. He just stood there, shoulders trembling slightly, eyes fixed on the bag. His throat tightened, as if all the anger, exhaustion, and fear from the past few days had condensed into this single moment. He tried to take a deep breath, but the pressure in his chest wouldn't ease. His fingers clutched the strap tighter, afraid that if he let go, everything would disappear like a dream. In the small room, only a few sounds remained. The investigator's pen scratching across the report. The slow ticking of the clock. and the heavy breathing of the young man slumped in the chair. Light from the barred window cast long, uneven stripes across the concrete floor, brushing lightly against Hung's feet, faint, trembling beams of hope trying to pierce through the cigarette smoke and morning fatigue. He stood there for a long time, eyes lowered to the floor. No one knew whether he felt relief, pity, or just a nameless emptiness. Just as Hung reached for the doorknob to leave, a rough, broken voice came from behind him. Weak. Shaky. As if every word had to fight its way out of his throat. "Sir, please. I'm sorry." The room froze. Hung stopped. He turned back toward the young man still sitting with his head down. Light from the barred window cut across his hollow face, revealing eyes brimming with tears. His lips trembled as he struggled to speak. I didn't know the person I robbed was your wife. I just needed money to buy medicine for my mom. She's very sick. We didn't have money for the hospital. I messed up." His voice wasn't loud, but it hit the room with a weight that seemed to press the air itself to the floor. Hung stood still, hands lowering at his sides. He looked down, jaw tight. Then, after a long silence, he answered, voice rough, slow, heavy. "You know, my wife has been scraping every last coin to treat our son. The bag you grabbed wasn't just money. It was her hope. It was the last bit of faith she was holding on to." The young man lifted his head. Despair filled his eyes. Tears streaked down his dirt-stained cheeks. I know I was wrong. I just hope they'll be lenient, let me go to rehab, give me a chance to start over. I swear, if I get out, I'll go home and take care of my mom. I won't do anything wrong ever again." Hung didn't respond right away. He looked at the young man, not with anger anymore, but with a sorrow so deep it felt almost like grief. A breeze from the hallway stirred the curtain beside the barred window. Light flickered across both of their faces. Hung exhaled softly, his hand forming a fist, then loosening again. "You need to change," he said quietly, voice low but firm. "Not to repay me, but so your mother doesn't have to cry anymore." The young man bowed his head. A single tear hit the cold tile floor, a tiny circle of water that disappeared instantly. No one spoke after that. The only sound in the room was the slow, steady ticking of the clock on the wall, cutting through the heavy air of cigarette smoke and quiet, uneven breaths. Hung turned away, gripping the fabric strap of the ethnic pouch as he walked out of the room. Outside, the midday sunlight flooded the hallway, so bright he had to narrow his eyes. He kept walking. But the words, "I'm sorry," lingered in his mind, echoing long after the door had closed. That afternoon, the city was covered in a thin layer of golden light, soft, hazy, almost like mist. The last sunlight slipped through the trees in front of the hospital, casting slow, tired shadows across the cracked pavement. The hospital speaker droned in a steady rhythm, mixed with the rolling wheels of stretchers and the sharp scent of disinfectant. Hung walked slowly down the hallway, every step heavy. In his hand was the small ethnic pouch, carefully wrapped in a thin evidence bag, still carrying the warmth of his palm. For days, those hands had held the handlebars, held his phone, held fear so tightly that even his bones felt stiff. Now that everything was finally returned, his fingers trembled, as if he feared it could all vanish again. Light filtered through a narrow window, brushing over his sun-darkened face. Beneath the sweat and dust was exhaustion from sleepless nights. But in his eyes, a softness, a quiet relief that only comes after days of torment. He stopped at the door to the patient room. Inside, Hoica sat by the bed, carefully feeding Tony spoon by spoon. The little boy opened his mouth obediently, then tapped the spoon against the bowl, making tiny playful noises. The sunlight spilled across Hoica's hair, messy, sweat-damp, yet somehow still gentle and beautiful. Hung pushed the door open quietly. Hoica turned, startled, and froze when she saw what he was holding. You got it back?" Her voice cracked, trembling. Hung nodded. His steps were heavy, but his gaze softened as he approached. He placed the pouch into her hands, voice low, warm, carrying the weariness of the police station and the long hallway behind him. Yes. They caught him. A young addict, living in a rundown boarding house near the bus station. He said he only needed the money to buy medicine for his sick mother. He paused, looking out the window where the sunlight had already begun to fade. I don't blame him anymore. Maybe someone out there is struggling just as much as we are. Hoica stared at the pouch, the same one she had carried for years. The scratched leather strap, the loose stitches, the faded fabric. All pieces of memory soaked in kitchen smoke, sweat, and last night's tears. She slowly opened it. Everything was still there, the medical documents, the money for Tony's treatment, the doctor's notes, and the small cloth she always used to wrap Tony's food. Her hands trembled. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Then suddenly, she clutched the pouch to her chest, pressing it against her heart. Her voice broke, shaking with every breath. Thank you for not giving up. And thank you, that there are still good people in this world. Hung stood quietly. He watched her hold the pouch like the most precious thing she had. Not because of the money, but because of the fragile hope they had fought so hard to protect. He said nothing, just placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. A warm, silent reassurance that everything would be all right. Tony, still playing with his spoon, looked up at them. He didn't understand the situation. He only saw his mother crying and his father standing close beside her. For some reason, Tony giggled, a bright, ringing laugh, and clapped his tiny hands. Both Hung and Hoica turned toward him. They looked at their son, then looked at each other. And for the first time in days, they both smiled. The last rays of sunset spread across their faces, soft and warm. Tony's laughter echoed through the white hospital room, chasing away all the fear and exhaustion. For that moment, time slowed. Outside, the noise of traffic, footsteps, and wind faded into the distance. Only the warmth of the late afternoon remained. 3 breaths intertwined in the same small space. And a rare, fragile peace that they had earned with tears, courage, and love. Late afternoon. Outside the hospital window, the sky slowly shifted to a pale orange. The last, faint ray of sunlight slipped through the fogged glass, casting soft slanted beams across the white tile floor. Dust in the air shimmered as if moving in slow motion with every quiet breath. Inside the small room, it was so still you could hear the ticking of the clock. The monitor beeped steadily, mixing with the whisper of the wind sliding through the door crack. The scent of disinfectant and freshly cooked rice porridge lingered in the air, familiar, yet heavy on the heart. Hoica sat at the bedside. Her face was pale from sleepless nights, yet her eyes held a gentle glow, the kind only mothers have. Her hair fell loosely around her cheeks, a few damp strands catching the sunlight, turning them into thin golden threads. In her hand was a small bowl of porridge. She blew lightly on each spoonful and brought it to her son's lips. Here, baby, just one more spoon. Mommy cooked this for you. Tony sat propped up against a pillow, his tiny body swallowed by the white blanket. He opened his mouth obediently, then giggled, waving his tiny hands as if trying to catch the sunlight dancing on the ceiling. His eyes, clear and bright like morning dew, never left his mother's face. Hoica leaned down to scoop another spoonful. Then Tony tilted his head slightly. His lips parted. At first, she thought he was just playing, making random sounds like always, scattered, meaningless noises. But then the word came out. Soft. Fragile. Shaky. Mom. The spoon stopped midair. Hoica froze. Her eyes widened, breath caught in her chest. Time stopped. All the surrounding sounds, hospital announcements, footsteps, carts rolling, faded into silence. She slowly set the bowl down. Her voice trembled, barely a whisper. "Sweetheart, what did you say?" Tony looked at her, eyes curving into little crescent moons. And again, clearer this time. "Certain." "Mom." Her hands shook uncontrollably. Tears spilled down her cheeks. She covered her mouth, laughing and crying all at once. "Hung, did you hear that? He called me. He really spoke." Hung, who had been standing in the corner, went rigid. His heart pounded painfully fast. He stepped closer, staring at his son, this tiny boy, smiling up at them, eyes shining. Silence. Then a slow smile formed on his lips, soft, full of emotion he couldn't hide. He placed a steady hand on his wife's shoulder. "See? We lost the money, but we gained what matters most." His voice was low, warm, trembling with gratitude. Hoica collapsed into his chest, laughing and sobbing at the same time, the kind of sound only people who have suffered long enough finally make when happiness arrives. Tony watched them, confused, then suddenly burst into giggles, pure, ringing laughter that filled the room. He reached out with his tiny hand, touching his mother's fingers. Warm. Soft. Alive. The last sunset light washed over the three of them, thin, gentle, golden. Hung watched his son, his hand still holding his wife's shoulder. He didn't say another word. But his eyes said everything: gratitude, faith, and a quiet happiness that didn't need to be explained. Outside, the sun dipped behind distant buildings. The fading light reflected on the warm porridge, on Hoica's tear-stained smile, on Tony's tiny hands. In that sterile hospital room, time stopped. Just to listen to the very first laugh. Of a child who finally learned to say, "Mom." Today, after so many days of waiting, a miracle finally came to Hoica and Hung. Tony, the little boy who once could not speak, finally said his very first word. Just one short word, "Mom," yet it lit up their entire world. All the tears, all the exhaustion and fear of the past days, disappeared in that single moment. They lost money, faced fear and uncertainty, but in return, they received something far more precious. A miracle that no amount of money could ever buy. But their journey is far from over. Sometimes, miracles don't just bring joy. Sometimes, they open the door to the unexpected. Stay tuned for the next episode. As Tony begins to speak more, word by word, filling their days with laughter and hope. But amidst those joyful moments, a strange symptom suddenly appears. And even the doctors begin to worry. Could it be that behind Tony's miraculous progress lies something no one could have foreseen? Do you believe Hoica and Hung's journey is finally at peace? Leave your prediction in the comments. Because in life, sometimes after a miracle, comes the greatest challenge.
Xin chào tất cả mọi người đã quay trở lại với kênh của mình. Hôm nay thì mình tiếp tục đưa đến với mọi người câu chuyện về câu chuyện mới nhất của Lý Hoài Ca và Cảnh sát Hùng mọi người. Khi mà Hoài Ca thì tìm được một đại úy, còn Tony thì khỏi bệnh. Mình đang làm thumbnail mà mình cũng chưa biết là làm kiểu gì cho nó hợp lý. Mọi người hãy đăng ký kênh và ủng hộ cho kênh mình nha. Cảm ơn mọi người, tạm biệt.